Riley Stone pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of the corridor and took a deep breath. The alien writing on the signs around her still looked like random scratches after 6 months at the academy. She could read them now, but they never felt natural. Nothing about this place felt natural. The Galactic Military Academy floated in the empty space between star systems. It was built by 12 different species working together, and it showed. Some corridors were tall and narrow for the bird-like aliens. Others were wide and low for the creatures that crawled. The gravity changed between sections to make everyone comfortable, which meant nobody was ever truly comfortable. Riley walked toward her next class, watching other cadets move past her. There was Nira, whose crystal body caught the light and threw rainbows on the walls. Her species thought in perfect logic patterns that could solve any problem if given enough time. Behind her came Brix, moving with the careful precision that all insect species shared. His 6 arms could work on different calculations at the same time. These aliens were brilliant. Riley knew that. They could plan battles that would take place years in the future. They could calculate the exact resources needed for campaigns across entire galaxies. They could predict enemy movements with mathematical precision that made human computers look like toys. But they were slow. Riley had learned this in her first week. During a simple tactical exercise, she had suggested a quick flanking maneuver. The instructor, a tall gray alien named Professor Vorth, had stopped the entire class to explain why her idea was foolish. Real military planning took time, he said. Days of analysis. Careful study of every possibility. The greatest military minds in galactic history were those who never rushed into battle. The other cadets had nodded along. Of course they did. Their species had evolved on peaceful worlds where predators were rare. They had time to think about everything. Their wars lasted decades because both sides would spend months planning each battle. To them, Riley's quick thinking looked like panic. She entered the strategy classroom and took her usual seat in the back. The room was designed like an amphitheater, with rows of seats rising up around a central holographic display. Each seat was adjustable to fit different body types. Riley's was set for human proportions, which made her one of the smallest people in the room. Commander Drex stood at the center of the room. His reptilian species came from a world where patience was survival. They could stay perfectly still for hours while hunting. This made them excellent defensive strategists. Drex had fought in 3 galactic conflicts and never lost a battle. He was also convinced that humans had no business being soldiers. Today we will analyze the Battle of Carrion 6, Drex announced. His voice was slow and careful, like everything else about him. This conflict lasted 4 years and involved 17 different species. It is considered a masterpiece of strategic planning. The holographic display came to life, showing star systems and fleet movements. Riley watched as Drex began to break down every decision made during the battle. He explained why the commanders had waited 8 months before making their first move. He showed how careful resource management had determined the outcome. He praised the patience of generals who had sacrificed short-term advantages for long-term victory. Riley found herself thinking about human military history. She remembered studying World War II, where battles were decided in hours or days. She thought about special forces operations that succeeded or failed in minutes. Human generals talked about seizing the initiative, striking fast, keeping the enemy off balance. Everything her species had learned about war was the opposite of what this academy taught. Cadet Stone, Drex said suddenly. Riley realized she had been staring out the window instead of paying attention. Perhaps you would like to share your thoughts on this strategic masterpiece. Riley looked at the holographic display. The battle showed fleets moving slowly across space, taking months to position themselves. Both sides had spent years gathering intelligence. Every move was calculated and recalculated before being executed. It seems very thorough, Riley said carefully. Thorough? Drex's eyes narrowed. This is the finest example of military planning in recorded galactic history. The commanders involved spent 2 years developing their strategy before the first shot was fired. 2 years? Riley could not hide her surprise. Indeed, unlike some species, civilized military forces do not rush blindly into combat. We think, we plan, we consider every possibility. Drex's tone made it clear he was talking about humans when he said, some species. Nira raised one of her crystalline arms. Cadet Stone, how long does human military planning typically take? Riley thought about how to answer. It depends on the situation. Sometimes we plan for months. Sometimes we have to make decisions in seconds. The classroom fell silent. Several cadets turned to stare at her. Making military decisions in seconds was apparently as shocking to them as planning for 2 years had been to her. Seconds? Brix clicked his mandibles in what Riley had learned was confusion. How can anyone analyze all the variables in seconds? We don't analyze everything, Riley said. We look for patterns. We trust our instincts. We adapt as the situation changes. Professor Vorth, who had been listening from the back of the room, stepped forward. Instincts are what animals use, Cadet Stone. Sentient beings use reason. Riley felt her face getting hot. This was the same conversation she had been having for 6 months. Every time she suggested something fast or aggressive, the instructors acted like she was being primitive. They talked about human military history like it was embarrassing. They seemed to think that evolving on a dangerous planet had made humans bad at warfare instead of good at it. Earth species had to fight for survival, Riley said. That taught us to think quickly under pressure. Yes, Drek said. And that is exactly the problem. Real warfare is not about survival instincts. It is about careful planning and patient execution. The galaxy's greatest military victories have been won by commanders who took time to think. After class, Riley walked alone through the academy corridors. She passed study groups where aliens worked together on complex tactical problems. They would spend hours debating the best approach to theoretical scenarios. Their methods produced elegant solutions that minimized casualties and maximized efficiency. Riley understood why the Academy valued these approaches. The aliens were trying to make war more civilized. They wanted to reduce suffering and waste. Their slow, careful methods had brought peace to most of the galaxy, but Riley also understood something the aliens didn't. Sometimes there was no time to think. Sometimes the enemy would not wait for you to finish your calculations. Sometimes survival meant moving faster than perfect planning allowed. She had tried to explain this to her instructors, but they did not want to hear it. To them, human military doctrine looked like organized chaos. They could not understand how anyone could make good decisions without taking time to consider every option. The final examination was coming soon. Riley knew she would have to prove herself using their methods, not her own. She would have to be patient and careful and logical. She would have to pretend that speed was less important than perfection. But deep down, she knew they were wrong about something important. War was not a chess game played by patient generals. War was about survival, and humans had been learning to survive longer than any other species in the Academy. The announcement came during breakfast in the main dining hall. Riley was eating something that the food dispensers claimed was similar to Earth oatmeal, though it tasted like metal and disappointment. Around her, cadets from 12 different species consumed their preferred nutrients in ways that still amazed her after 6 months. Commander Drex entered the hall with unusual energy. Normally, he moved with the slow deliberation of his reptilian species, but today his steps were quicker. He climbed onto the central platform where instructors made academy-wide announcements. "Attention all final-year cadets," Drex began. His voice carried clearly through the hall's translation system. "Today I will explain your final examination." The hall fell silent. Even the constant clicking of Brix's species stopped as they focused on the commander. Riley noticed that several instructors had gathered around the edges of the room. This was clearly a big moment. "Your final test will be the Omega Protocol," Drex continued, "a full-scale battle simulation that has been used to evaluate military officers for over 2 centuries. Riley had heard whispers about the Omega Protocol. It was supposedly the most complex military simulation ever created. Cadets who passed it were guaranteed positions as tactical officers on any ship in the Galactic Fleet. Those who failed often left the Academy entirely. The simulation places you in command of a battle fleet consisting of 200 ships, Drex explained. You will face an enemy force of unknown composition and capabilities. Your mission is simple. Achieve total victory with minimal losses. Nira raised her crystalline arm. "What is the time limit for the exercise?" Drex's mouth stretched into what his species used for a smile. "There is no time limit. The simulation continues until you either win or lose. However, I can tell you that the average completion time is 8 hours. The fastest successful completion took 4 hours and 12 minutes, achieved by Cadet Yorth of the Central Worlds 57 years ago. That record has never been broken." Riley felt her heart sink. 8 hours? She could barely sit still through a 2-hour lecture. and now they expected her to run a battle simulation for an entire day. Everything about this academy was designed for species that thought slowly and carefully. The simulation will begin next week, Drex continued. Each cadet will have one attempt. All other cadets and instructors will observe to ensure fairness and to learn from each approach. We will proceed in order of academic standing. Riley did not need to check her ranking. She was dead last. Her quick thinking and aggressive tactics had earned her failing grades in every strategy class. While other cadets spent hours developing perfect battle plans, Riley would suggest rapid strikes that her instructors considered reckless. Cadet Nira will go first, Drex announced. Her logical analysis methods have been exemplary this year. Nira's crystal body seemed to glow brighter with pride. Her species could hold thousands of calculations in their minds simultaneously. She could probably plan the entire battle before the simulation even started. Cadet Brix will follow, Drex said. His precision and attention to detail have been impressive. Brix clicked his mandibles in acknowledgement. His insect species were known for their patience. They could spend days analyzing a single tactical decision from every possible angle. Drex continued down the list. Each cadet represented the finest military mind their species could produce. There was Fern, whose amphibious people could coordinate complex fleet movements like swimming in formation. There was Gale, whose gaseous species could process information at incredible speeds while still maintaining perfect accuracy. And finally, Drex said, his voice taking on a slightly mocking tone, Cadet Stone will conclude our examinations. Riley felt every eye in the dining hall turn toward her. Some of the aliens looked curious. Others seemed amused. A few appeared almost sympathetic, as if they were watching someone about to embarrass themselves publicly. After breakfast, Riley found herself walking through the Academy's observation deck. The massive windows showed the endless stars beyond the station. She often came here when the alien teaching methods frustrated her beyond endurance. Nervous about the examination? A voice said behind her. Riley turned to see Professor Vorth approaching. The tall gray alien had been one of her harshest critics, constantly pointing out the flaws in human military thinking. I suppose, Riley admitted. You should be, Vorth said, not unkindly. The Omega Protocol is not like your Earth combat scenarios. It requires patience, careful analysis, and strategic thinking that extends beyond immediate tactical concerns. Riley had heard this lecture many times. I understand that my methods are different. Different? Vorth tilted his head. Cadet Stone, your methods are not just different. They are unsuitable for modern warfare. The galaxy has evolved beyond the crude tactics your species employed during your primitive conflicts. Our primitive conflicts? Riley felt anger rising in her chest. Yes, I have studied human military history extensively. Your species fought thousands of wars over resources, territory, and ideology. You developed weapons designed solely to kill other humans as efficiently as possible. Your entire military doctrine is based on aggression and speed rather than wisdom and restraint. Vorth gestured toward the stars beyond the windows. The galactic community has moved beyond such barbarism. Modern warfare is about achieving objectives with minimal casualties. It requires commanders who can think beyond their animal instincts. Riley bit back her first response. Instead, she asked, what if the enemy does not give you time to think? What enemy? Vorth seemed genuinely confused. There have been no major galactic conflicts in over 3 centuries. The few disputes that arise are settled through careful negotiation and limited tactical actions. The kind of total warfare your species specialized in simply does not exist anymore. This was the fundamental disconnect that Riley had struggled with since arriving at the Academy. The aliens had achieved something humans had never managed. They had made war civilized. Their battles were careful, limited affairs where both sides followed unspoken rules about casualties and tactics. But Riley had grown up on Earth, where war was never civilized. She had trained with human military forces that still prepared for enemies who would show no mercy and follow no rules. Her instincts were shaped by millions of years of evolution on a world where hesitation meant death. Professor, Riley said carefully, what if you encountered an enemy that did not follow your rules? What if they attacked without warning or negotiation? What if they were willing to accept massive casualties to achieve their goals? Vorth stared at her for a long moment. Such an enemy would be effectively impossible to fight using civilized methods, he said slowly. But such an enemy could not exist. Any species capable of interstellar travel must have evolved beyond such primitive aggression. Riley nodded, but she was thinking about human history. Her species had developed interstellar travel, while still fighting wars that made alien conflicts look like polite disagreements. Humans had reached the stars not despite their aggression, but because of their ability to adapt and overcome any threat. The next few days passed quickly. Riley attended classes where instructors explained the finer points of battle simulation. She watched as other cadets studied fleet compositions and tactical formations. Everyone was preparing for the Omega Protocol in their own way. Nira had created vast crystalline matrices that held thousands of tactical possibilities. Brix had built detailed models of every known ship class to better understand their capabilities. Other cadets were forming study groups and sharing research. Riley tried to prepare the same way, but she found herself getting frustrated with the slow pace of analysis. While other cadets spent hours debating the merits of different approaches, Riley would see obvious solutions immediately. Her instructors had trained her to ignore these instincts, to force herself to think more slowly and carefully. On the night before the examinations began, Riley lay in her quarters, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow she would watch 12 of the finest tactical minds in the galaxy attempt the most complex military simulation ever created. Then, when they were finished proving their brilliance, it would be her turn to fail publicly. She thought about her training on Earth, where speed and aggression were valued over careful planning. She thought about human military doctrine that emphasized rapid decision-making and constant adaptation. She thought about all the things she had been told to forget since arriving at this academy. Outside her window, the stars seemed to shine a little brighter. Tomorrow would determine whether a human could succeed in a galaxy that had forgotten how to fight wars the way humans understood them. Riley fell asleep wondering if civilized warfare was really an improvement, or just another way of fighting that favored certain species over others. The simulation chamber hummed with quiet energy as dozens of cadets and instructors gathered in the observation area. Massive holographic displays surrounded the central command pod, ready to show every detail of the upcoming battle. Riley found a seat in the back row, trying to stay invisible while the Academy's best tactical minds prepared to demonstrate their skills. Nira approached the command pod with characteristic precision. Her crystalline body caught the chamber's lights and scattered rainbow patterns across the walls. She paused at the threshold, closing her multifaceted eyes as she entered what her species called the logic trance, a state where pure mathematical thinking took over. "Begin simulation," Commander Drex announced. The chamber exploded into three-dimensional tactical displays. Riley watched in amazement as hundreds of ship markers appeared in space, forming two opposing fleets. Red markers showed enemy vessels of unknown capabilities, while blue markers represented Nira's forces. Asteroid fields, planetary bodies, and spatial anomalies created a complex battlefield that stretched across multiple star systems. Nira stood motionless for nearly 10 minutes, her crystal structure pulsing with soft light as she processed the initial situation. Riley could see data streams flowing across her translucent form, her species' unique ability to visualize mathematical relationships in three-dimensional thought patterns. When Nira finally moved, her actions were smooth and deliberate. She began reorganizing her fleet formations, grouping ships by capability, and creating elegant geometric patterns that maximized defensive coverage while maintaining offensive potential. Each decision was calculated to 17 decimal places of probability. 3 hours passed. Nira had positioned her forces with mathematical precision, creating overlapping fields of fire and mutual support networks that any military academy would use as a textbook example. She identified enemy weak points through careful observation and statistical analysis, then developed counters for each possible enemy response. Riley found herself getting restless. She could see obvious opportunities that Nira was ignoring in favor of more complex solutions. The enemy fleet had exposed flanks that could be exploited immediately, but Nira was too busy perfecting her formations to notice tactical opportunities. 6 hours in, Nira finally began her attack. Her assault was a masterpiece of coordination. Ships moved in perfect harmony, concentrating fire on predetermined targets while maintaining defensive integrity. Every shot was calculated for maximum efficiency. Supply lines were managed with mathematical precision that ensured no ship would run out of ammunition or energy. The battle unfolded like a chess match played by masters. Nira anticipated enemy moves and prepared counters in advance. Her fleet advanced steadily, claiming territory and eliminating threats with minimal losses. When unexpected enemy tactics appeared, she adapted by running probability calculations that accounted for hundreds of variables. 8 hours and 14 minutes after beginning, Nira achieved total victory. Her final casualty report showed she had lost only 3 ships while destroying the entire enemy fleet. The observation deck erupted in appreciative sounds from various species, everything from crystalline chiming to insectoid clicking. "Exemplary work," Commander Drex announced. A textbook demonstration of logical tactical progression. Nira bowed gracefully before leaving the command pod. She had set a high standard that would be difficult to match. Brix was next. The insectoid cadet approached the simulation with the methodical patience his species was famous for. Where Nira had relied on pure logic, Brix brought detailed analysis and perfect timing to his approach. He spent the first hour simply observing, his 6 arms working on different analysis tasks simultaneously. One pair tracked enemy movement patterns, another calculated resource requirements, while his third pair worked on contingency planning for dozens of possible scenarios. Riley watched Brix build his strategy like constructing a complex machine. Every component had a specific purpose, and every connection between components was tested for stability. His planning phase alone was more thorough than most completed battles. When Brix finally acted, his precision was stunning. Ship movements were timed to the second. Supply convoys arrived exactly when needed. Combat formations shifted and adapted with the kind of perfect coordination that only the most disciplined military forces could achieve. Brix's battle style was completely different from Nira's mathematical approach. Instead of calculating probabilities, he focused on perfect execution of proven tactics. His fleet moved like a single organism, each ship knowing exactly what every other ship would do in any situation. 7 hours and 31 minutes later, Brix achieved victory with only 2 ship losses. His methodical approach had eliminated every source of uncertainty and risk, creating a campaign that succeeded through superior preparation rather than brilliant improvisation. The pattern continued over the next 2 days. Fern, the amphibious cadet, demonstrated fluid coordination that treated ship fleets like schools of fish moving through 3-dimensional space. Her battle lasted 6 hours and 47 minutes, using elegant maneuvers that confused enemy forces through constant motion and positional advantage. Gale, whose gaseous species could process information at tremendous speeds, showed how raw computing power could overcome tactical challenges. His approach involved rapid analysis of thousands of possible moves, selecting optimal choices faster than most species could even understand the options. His victory came in 5 hours and 53 minutes. Each approach was different, but they all shared common elements that Riley began to recognize. Extended observation periods where cadets studied enemy formations for hours before acting. Careful resource management that treated every ship and weapon as a precious asset to be preserved. Gradual tactical development that built advantage slowly and methodically. Most importantly, every alien approach assumed that both sides would fight according to unspoken rules about acceptable casualties, reasonable tactical choices, and civilized conduct. None of them considered what would happen if the enemy refused to follow these conventions. Riley watched 12 brilliant tactical demonstrations over 3 days. Each cadet earned praise from the instructors, who pointed out clever solutions and elegant strategies. The fastest time was achieved by a moth-like species whose patient observation had revealed a critical enemy weakness that could be exploited through careful positioning. As the last alien cadet completed their simulation, Riley realized something troubling. Every approach she had witnessed would fail completely against an enemy that fought the way humans understood warfare. The careful planning periods would be impossible if the enemy attacked without warning. The resource conservation strategies would collapse if the enemy was willing to accept massive casualties. The gradual tactical development would be useless. Against opponents who struck fast and adapted, constantly these aliens had developed sophisticated methods for fighting other aliens who shared their values about reasonable conduct and acceptable losses. But they had never considered facing an enemy that approached war as a matter of survival rather than a complex strategic puzzle. Commander Drex called her name, and Riley realized her turn had arrived. She walked toward the command pod while feeling dozens of alien eyes watching her every move. Behind her, she could hear quiet conversations in various alien languages, probably discussing how quickly the primitive human would fail. Riley paused at the threshold of the command pod, looking back at the assembled observers. Nira's crystalline form was still glowing from her earlier success. Brix's mandibles clicked softly, and what she had learned was anticipation. The instructors watched with expressions that ranged from curious to skeptical. These beings represented the finest military minds their species could produce. They had demonstrated tactical brilliance, strategic thinking, and operational excellence that would be admired throughout the galaxy. Their methods had brought peace and stability to most known civilizations, but they had never fought humans. Riley stepped into the command pod and placed her hands on the control interface. The familiar weight of command responsibility settled on her shoulders, bringing back memories of training exercises on Earth where hesitation meant failure and adaptation meant survival. She looked up at Commander Drex, who was preparing to deliver his standard briefing about taking time to analyze the situation carefully. The massive holographic displays around her showed the same complex battlefield that had challenged 12 brilliant alien tacticians. Riley took a deep breath and waited for the simulation to begin. In a few moments, she would either prove that human military doctrine had a place in the civilized galaxy, or she would confirm every alien suspicion about her species' primitive approach to warfare. The choice would not be hers to make rationally. When the simulation started, her millions of years of human evolutionary instincts would take over, and the galaxy would learn what happened when predators went to war. Riley stood inside the command pod as the simulation systems activated around her. The holographic displays materialized in layers, creating a three-dimensional battlefield that extended in all directions. Hundreds of ship markers appeared in space, forming complex formations that represented two opposing fleets. Data streams flowed across translucent screens, showing everything from ammunition counts to gravitational anomalies. The same tactical scenario that had challenged 12 brilliant alien minds now surrounded her. Enemy forces in red, positioned behind asteroid fields and planetary masses. Her own fleet in blue, arranged in standard defensive formations. Spatial terrain that offered both opportunities and obstacles. Resource management systems that required careful attention to fuel, ammunition, and crew fatigue. Commander Drex stood outside the pod, observing from the instructor position. Behind him, dozens of alien cadets and faculty members watched from the observation area. Riley could feel their attention like a weight pressing down on her. Some seemed curious about how the human would approach the challenge. Others appeared to be waiting for entertainment as she struggled with tactics beyond her primitive understanding. Cadet Stone, Drex began in his slow, deliberate voice. You are now in command of Battlefleet 7. Your mission is to achieve total victory against enemy forces while minimizing your own casualties. Take as much time as you need to analyze the tactical situation. Remember that hasty decisions often lead to unnecessary losses. Riley nodded, her hands resting on the control interface. The familiar weight of tactical command settled over her, bringing back memories of training exercises on Earth. But this was different. This was the culmination of 6 months at an academy that had consistently told her that human military thinking was wrong. The simulation contains multiple variables that must be carefully considered. Drex continued. Enemy capabilities are unknown and must be determined through observation and careful probing. Your own fleet composition offers various tactical possibilities that should be thoroughly evaluated before committing to any course of action. Riley's eyes moved across the holographic display, taking in the overall strategic situation. 200 ships under her command, facing an enemy force of similar size. Complex spatial terrain that would affect movement and communication. Multiple objectives that would require careful prioritization. Resource management will be critical to your success, Drex said. Previous cadets have found that careful attention to logistics often determines the outcome, more than tactical brilliance. Remember that every ship lost represents not just military assets, but also the lives of crew members who depend on your judgment. The instructor's words blended into background noise as Riley continued her assessment. She could see the enemy formations, partially hidden behind asteroid fields and orbital bodies. Their positioning suggested defensive intentions, but several formations seemed positioned for rapid offensive action. Standard approach would be to spend hours analyzing their capabilities and developing counters for each possible threat. Supply lines must be carefully maintained throughout the engagement, Drex continued. The simulation includes realistic constraints on ammunition, fuel, and repair capabilities. Many promising tactical approaches have failed due to inadequate logistical planning. It is essential to think several moves ahead, considering not just immediate tactical gains but long-term strategic sustainability. Riley noticed something interesting about the enemy fleet disposition. Their command ships were positioned in what appeared to be a strong defensive cluster, but the formation created a vulnerability that could be exploited if someone was willing to accept significant casualties during the initial assault. It was exactly the kind of opportunity that human military doctrine was designed to seize. Previous successful attempts have demonstrated the value of patient observation, Drex said. The simulation rewards careful analysis over aggressive action. Take time to understand the full scope of the challenge before committing your forces to any irreversible actions. Remember that this exercise will evaluate not just your final result, but your decision-making process throughout the engagement. Riley's mind was already moving beyond analysis into action planning. She could see how to break the enemy formation, but it would require the kind of rapid, aggressive assault that her instructors had consistently criticized. Everything she had learned at the academy said to spend hours developing a careful, methodical approach that minimized risk and maximized efficiency. But everything she had learned on Earth said that hesitation was death. The Academy's tactical database contains detailed information about previous attempts, Drex continued. You may wish to review successful approaches used by other cadets. While each situation is unique, certain principles of careful planning and methodical execution have proven effective across multiple scenarios. Riley realized that Drex was giving her the same extensive briefing he had provided to every other cadet. He was encouraging her to take the slow, careful approach that had worked for everyone else. He was trying to help her succeed using methods that her species had never mastered. Are there any questions about the parameters of the exercise? Drex asked. No, sir, Riley said quietly. Very well. Remember to take your time and think carefully about each decision. The simulation will wait for your commands, so there is no pressure to act quickly. Careful analysis is far more valuable than rapid action. Drex paused, looking directly at Riley through the pod's transparent walls. When you are ready to begin the tactical engagement, simply inform me and I will start the simulation timer. Riley took a deep breath and looked one more time at the holographic battlefield around her. 200 ships under her command. Complex enemy formations that would take hours to fully understand. Spatial terrain that offered both opportunities and obstacles. Resource constraints that demanded careful management. Everything her instructors had taught her said to begin with extensive observation and analysis. Study enemy capabilities, develop multiple contingency plans, build tactical approaches gradually and methodically, fight the kind of careful, civilized war that the galaxy had perfected over centuries of peaceful conflict. But Riley was not from the civilized galaxy. She was from Earth, where war was about survival and victory belonged to those who could adapt faster than their enemies could respond. I'm ready, Riley said. Commander Drex nodded approvingly. Excellent. Remember to take time to carefully analyze the situation before making any major tactical decisions. Begin your observation phase whenever you feel prepared to start the detailed assessment of enemy capabilities and terrain factors that will inform your strategic planning process. He reached for the control panel that would activate the simulation timer and begin recording her performance for evaluation. His finger hovered over the activation key as he prepared to deliver the final instruction. That would start her examination. When you have completed your initial assessment and are ready to begin tactical operations, Drex said slowly, the simulation will commence. Take all the time you need for preliminary analysis. Start. The word hung in the air for a fraction of a second as Riley's training took over. 6 months of academy instruction vanished, replaced by millions of years of human evolution and decades of Earth military doctrine. Her eyes swept the battlefield once, identifying targets, opportunities, and threats in the same instant. Her hands moved across the control interface before Drex could finish his sentence. The observation deck erupted in surprise sounds from multiple species as Riley's fleet exploded into motion. Ships that had been in defensive formation suddenly accelerated toward enemy positions. abandoning careful positioning in favor of aggressive assault patterns that no other cadet had even considered. "Cadet Stone," Drek started to say, but stopped as he realized what was happening. Riley was not taking time to analyze the situation. She was not studying enemy capabilities or developing careful tactical approaches. She was not following any of the methodical procedures that had made other cadets successful. She was fighting like a human. The simulation's artificial intelligence, designed to provide hours of tactical challenge against careful, methodical opponents, suddenly found itself facing something completely different. An enemy that struck without warning, adapted without hesitation, and accepted casualties that civilized species would never consider acceptable. Riley's assault hit the enemy formations before they could adapt to her unconventional approach. Ships that the AI had positioned for defensive operations found themselves under attack from directions they had not anticipated, by forces moving faster than their programming had predicted. The holographic displays around the command pod showed a battle unlike anything the Academy had ever recorded. Instead of the careful, gradual engagements that characterize civilized warfare, this was rapid, brutal, and decisive. Human military doctrine in action against opponents who had never faced anything like it. In the observation area, alien cadets watched in stunned silence as their understanding of proper military procedure was challenged by something they had never seen before: a human at war. The moment Riley's hands touched the controls, everything changed. The careful, methodical approach that had defined every previous attempt was abandoned in favor of something the Academy had never seen before. Pure human instinct took control, and the simulation responded to commands flowing faster than the watching aliens could track. Riley's opening move violated every principle the Academy taught. Instead of studying enemy formations, she immediately identified their command structure and launched a direct assault on their leadership vessels. Her fleet scattered from defensive positions into attack formations that prioritized speed over protection, sending fast destroyers racing ahead of the main force toward targets that other cadets had not even noticed. The enemy AI, programmed to counter careful, gradual tactics, found itself facing something completely unprecedented. Ships appeared in attack positions before defensive protocols could activate. Communication networks came under assault before backup systems could engage. Command vessels that had been positioned for safety suddenly found themselves primary targets in a battle that was moving too fast for standard responses. Riley did not pause to analyze the results of her opening assault. While enemy forces were still reacting to her destroyers, she sent her heavy cruisers in a flanking maneuver that exploited gaps in their formation. She identified 3 separate vulnerabilities simultaneously and attacked all of them at once, forcing the enemy to divide their attention between multiple threats. Commander Drex watched in stunned silence as tactical displays showed movements he had never seen before. Ships were operating beyond safe parameters, accepting damage levels that civilized forces would never tolerate. Fleet formations were shifting constantly, adapting to enemy responses faster than traditional command structures could process. "This is impossible," Professor Vorth whispered from the observation area. "She cannot coordinate that many simultaneous operations. No single commander can process that much tactical information in real time." But Riley was not processing information the way other species did. Where aliens calculated probabilities and analyzed options, humans recognized patterns. Millions of years of evolution as persistence hunters had given her species the ability to track multiple threats, identify opportunities, and adapt tactics without conscious thought. Riley's second wave hit the enemy formation while they were still responding to her first assault. She had identified their communication protocols and was jamming their coordination frequencies, while her own ships operated on backup channels that the enemy could not intercept. Their attempts to regroup were failing because they could not effectively coordinate their responses. The artificial intelligence controlling the enemy forces began implementing emergency protocols designed for unexpected tactical situations. But these protocols were based on civilized warfare principles that assumed rational actors making reasonable decisions. They could not adapt to an opponent who was willing to sacrifice entire squadrons to achieve specific, tactical objectives. Riley's fleet swept through the enemy formation like a storm. Ships that would have taken other cadets hours to eliminate were destroyed in minutes through concentrated fire that ignored traditional target prioritization. Instead of attacking the most dangerous enemies first, Riley was targeting vessels that provided structural support to enemy formations, causing entire battle groups to collapse. Nira's crystalline structure was pulsing with confused light patterns. "Her casualty rates are unacceptable," she said to Brix. "She has lost more ships in 10 minutes than I lost in 8 hours." But Brix was studying the tactical displays more carefully. "Look at her objectives," he clicked. "She is not trying to preserve her fleet. She is trying to destroy the enemy as quickly as possible. Every ship she loses serves a specific tactical purpose." This was the fundamental difference between human and alien approaches to warfare. The Academy taught that military forces were valuable assets to be preserved and used efficiently. Riley was treating her fleet as expendable tools for achieving victory, accepting losses that would horrify civilized commanders, but understanding that speed could be more valuable than preservation. Riley's final assault began 23 seconds after the simulation started. Her remaining forces converged on the enemy command cluster in a coordinated strike that brought overwhelming firepower to bear on critical targets. She had identified the exact sequence of enemy vessels that needed to be eliminated to cause complete command failure. The enemy AI attempted one final adaptation, redirecting all available forces to protect their command structure. But Riley had anticipated this response and positioned her ships to take advantage of the defensive concentration. Her assault continued through defensive fire that would have stopped any other attack, accepting casualties that served her larger tactical objective. 37 seconds after Commander Drex said, "Start," the simulation ended. Victory conditions met. Enemy forces eliminated. Mission accomplished. The observation area fell completely silent. Dozens of alien cadets and instructors stared at displays showing the aftermath of something they had never imagined possible. The same tactical scenario that had challenged the galaxy's finest military minds for hours had been resolved in less than a minute. Riley stood in the command pod, breathing hard from the intensity of rapid decision-making. Around her, holographic displays showed the final positions of both fleets, blue markers scattered across the battlefield, many showing destroyed or damaged vessels. Red markers completely eliminated, their formations broken and their command structure collapsed. Her final casualty report was staggering by Academy standards. She had lost 47 ships, more than any other cadet had lost during their entire simulation, but she had achieved total victory in a time that seemed impossible to every observer. Commander Drex slowly approached the command pod, his reptilian features showing confusion that was evident even across species barriers. "Cadet Stone," he said carefully, "please explain your tactical approach." Riley looked at the assembled aliens, trying to find words for something that had been pure instinct. "I identified the enemy command structure and eliminated it as quickly as possible. Everything else was supporting that objective." "But your casualty rates," Professor Vorth said from the observation area. "You lost nearly a quarter of your fleet. How can you consider that acceptable?" "Because the alternative was losing all of it," Riley replied. "Speed was more important than preservation. If I had taken time to minimize casualties, the enemy would have adapted to my tactics and the battle would have lasted hours." Nira stepped forward, her crystalline structure still pulsing with confused patterns. "How did you process all that tactical information so quickly? The number of variables you were tracking simultaneously should have been impossible for a single mind to handle." Riley thought about how to explain pattern recognition to a species that relied on mathematical calculation. "I did not calculate anything. I looked at the battlefield and saw what needed to happen. Human training teaches us to trust our instincts when analysis takes too long." "Instincts?" Drex repeated the word like it was foreign to him. "You made command decisions affecting 200 ships based on instincts?" "Yes, sir. On Earth, we call it combat intuition. The ability to see tactical opportunities and threats without conscious analysis. It is what kept my species alive on a dangerous planet." Brix clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "But how can intuition be more effective than careful analysis? How can instinct produce better results than logical calculation?" Riley looked around the chamber at faces representing 12 different species, all of whom shared the same confusion about what they had just witnessed. They were brilliant beings who had perfected the art of civilized warfare, but they had never encountered an opponent who fought for survival rather than strategic advantage. "Because," Riley said finally, "sometimes there is no time to think. Sometimes the enemy will not wait for you to finish your calculations. Sometimes survival means moving faster than perfect planning allows. She gestured toward the tactical displays showing the aftermath of her assault. Your methods work perfectly against enemies who follow the same rules you do. But what happens when you face opponents who are willing to accept any casualties to achieve their objectives? What happens when the enemy strikes without warning and adapts faster than your analysis can keep up? The silence that followed her question was profound. Every alien in the chamber was confronting the same uncomfortable realization. Their sophisticated approach to warfare assumed that all opponents would share their values about reasonable conduct and acceptable losses. Riley had just demonstrated what happened when that assumption was wrong. Outside, the simulation chamber's windows, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the tactical revolution that had just occurred in a small military academy. But for the first time in centuries, the galaxy's finest military minds were questioning whether their civilized approach to warfare was actually an advantage, or just another way of fighting that had never been tested against true predators. The silence in the observation chamber stretched for nearly a full minute. Dozens of the galaxy's finest military minds stared at tactical displays showing the impossible result of Riley's simulation. The same scenario that had challenged brilliant strategists for hours had been resolved in 37 seconds through methods that defied every principle they had been taught. Commander Drex was the first to speak, his voice carrying the careful control of someone trying to process something beyond his understanding. There must be an error in the simulation. No tactical scenario can be resolved that quickly without compromising the system's integrity. He moved to the primary control console and began running diagnostic protocols. Professor Vorth joined him. Their combined expertise focused on finding the technical malfunction that would explain what they had just witnessed. Other instructors gathered around secondary displays, checking system parameters and simulation variables. Riley remained in the command pod, watching the aliens search for an explanation that would let them dismiss her performance as a computer error. She understood their confusion. Everything they knew about warfare said that what she had accomplished was impossible. All systems show normal operation, Professor Vorth announced after several minutes of analysis. The simulation ran exactly as programmed. There was no malfunction. Then review the tactical recordings, Drex ordered. Examine every decision she made. Find the error in her approach that invalidates the result. The main holographic display shifted to replay mode, showing Riley's assault from the beginning. The assembled observers watched as her fleet abandoned defensive positions and struck directly at enemy command structures. They saw ships moving at speeds that violated safety protocols, accepting damage that civilized forces would never tolerate. Here, Nira said, her crystalline structure pulsing as she identified what appeared to be a critical mistake. She moved her destroyers beyond effective support range. They should have been eliminated by enemy defensive fire. But the replay showed something different. Riley's destroyers had approached through attack vectors that the enemy AI had not anticipated, exploiting gaps in defensive coverage that only appeared when multiple formations were attacked simultaneously. Her seemingly reckless assault had actually been precisely calculated to overwhelm enemy response capabilities. Look at this maneuver, Brix clicked, pointing to another segment of the recording. She sent her heavy cruisers into direct confrontation with superior enemy forces. The casualty projections should have made this approach impossible. Again, the replay revealed sophisticated tactical thinking behind apparently suicidal tactics. Riley had identified enemy vessels whose destruction would cause cascading failures in their command structure. Her heavy cruisers had served as guided weapons, trading themselves for targets that were far more valuable than the ship she was sacrificing. Professor Vorth stared at the tactical analysis with growing amazement. Every decision she made served a specific strategic purpose. She was not fighting randomly or recklessly. She was implementing a coherent battle plan that prioritized speed over preservation. But how? Drex demanded. How could she develop such a complex strategy in seconds? The analysis alone should have taken hours. Admiral Kess entered the chamber during the replay analysis. The ancient bird-like alien served as Academy Director and had observed military training for longer than any other being in the known galaxy. Her feathered form moved with the dignity of age and authority as she approached the central displays. I received reports of an unusual examination result, Admiral Kess said in her melodic voice. Please summarize what occurred. Commander Drex quickly explained the situation, emphasizing the impossibility of the time record and requesting permission to invalidate the results due to what he assumed must be systematic errors. Admiral Kess listened without interruption, her large eyes focused on the tactical replays. "Show me the complete recording," she ordered. The main display returned to the beginning of Riley's simulation. Admiral Kess watched intently as the human cadet ignored standard procedure and launched an immediate assault on enemy positions. The ancient alien's expression was unreadable as she observed tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. When the replay ended, Admiral Kess turned to Riley, who was still standing in the command pod. "Cadet Stone, please explain how you were able to process battlefield information so rapidly." Riley took a deep breath, knowing that her answer would determine whether her performance was accepted or dismissed. "Admiral, I did not process the information the way other species do. Where you calculate possibilities, humans recognize patterns. We do not analyze battles. We feel them. Feel them." Admiral Kess repeated. "Yes, ma'am. My species evolved as persistence hunters on a dangerous planet. We learned to track multiple threats, identify opportunities, and adapt tactics without conscious thought. What you call reckless aggression, we call survival instinct." Admiral Kess studied Riley for a long moment. "You are saying that human military capability is based on evolutionary advantages rather than intellectual training?" "In part, yes, ma'am. Human tactical doctrine assumes that hesitation means death. We strike first, strike fast, and adapt constantly. We accept casualties that other species find unacceptable because we understand that speed can be more valuable than preservation. But such an approach should be inferior to careful analysis," Professor Vorth protested. "Logical calculation should always produce better results than instinctive response." Admiral Kess turned to address the assembled observers. "That assumption may be incorrect. Consider what we have just witnessed. 12 of our finest tactical minds required hours to achieve victory through careful planning and methodical execution. This human achieved the same result in less than a minute through pure instinct." The implications of her words settled over the chamber like a heavy weight. For centuries, the galactic community had assumed that their civilized approach to warfare represented the highest possible evolution of military thinking. The idea that primitive instincts could be superior to sophisticated analysis challenged fundamental beliefs about intelligence and progress. "Admiral," Nira said carefully, "are you suggesting that human military methods are actually more effective than our own?" "I am suggesting that effectiveness depends on circumstances," Admiral Kess replied. "Our methods work perfectly against opponents who share our values about reasonable conduct and acceptable casualties. But what happens when we encounter enemies who do not follow our rules?" She gestured toward the tactical displays showing the aftermath of Riley's assault. "This human has demonstrated something we had forgotten. War is not always about careful planning and minimal casualties. Sometimes it is about survival. And survival belongs to those who can adapt faster than their enemies can respond." Commander Drek stepped forward, his reptilian features showing deep concern. "Admiral, surely you are not recommending that we abandon centuries of military evolution in favor of primitive aggression?" "I am recommending that we expand our understanding of what military effectiveness means," Admiral Kess replied. "Our methods have brought peace to the galaxy because everyone we fight shares our approach to warfare. But humans come from a world where peace was never guaranteed, where every conflict was about survival rather than strategic advantage." She turned back to Riley. "Your species developed interstellar travel while still fighting, wars that made our conflicts look like academic exercises. You reached the stars not despite your aggression, but because of your ability to overcome any threat through adaptation and speed." Riley nodded. "Yes, ma'am. Earth taught us that any enemy could be defeated if you were willing to pay the price and move fast enough to prevent them from adapting to your tactics." "And that," Admiral Kess said to the assembled observers, "is exactly what she demonstrated here today. She identified the price of victory and paid it without hesitation. She moved too fast for the enemy to adapt. She achieved in seconds what took others hours because she was not trying to fight a civilized war." The chamber fell silent, again as dozens of brilliant minds grappled with concepts that challenged everything they had been taught. The idea that primitive instincts could be superior to sophisticated reasoning was difficult to accept, but the evidence was displayed clearly on tactical screens around them. What does this mean for galactic military doctrine? Brix asked quietly. Admiral Kess considered the question carefully. It means we have been preparing to fight the wrong kind of war. We have perfected methods for conflicts between civilized species who follow unspoken rules about acceptable conduct. But if we ever encounter enemies who fight for survival, rather than strategic advantage, our approaches may be insufficient. She looked directly at Riley. It also means that humans may be the galaxy's most effective warriors, not despite their primitive origins, but because of them. Your species brings something to military thinking that we had lost. The understanding that sometimes victory requires accepting costs that civilized minds find unacceptable. Professor, Forth shook his head slowly. Are you saying that civilization has made us weaker as military forces? I am saying that civilization has changed what we mean by strength, Admiral Kess replied. We measure success by efficiency, minimal casualties, and elegant solutions. Humans measure success by survival and victory, regardless of cost. Both approaches have value, but they are designed for different kinds of conflicts. Riley stepped out of the command pod, facing the assembled aliens who represented the finest military tradition in galactic history. With respect, Admiral, I think the real lesson is that different situations require different approaches. Your methods work perfectly for the kind of conflicts the galaxy has been fighting. But if you ever face enemies who fight the way humans understand warfare, you will need tactics that can match their speed and aggression. Admiral Kess nodded approvingly. Precisely. Which is why the Academy must expand its curriculum to include human military doctrine alongside traditional approaches. We need officers who can think like civilized beings when facing civilized enemies, and like predators when facing predators. The ancient alien turned to address the entire chamber. Today we have learned something important about the nature of warfare. There is no single correct approach to military conflict. Effectiveness depends on understanding your enemy and adapting your methods accordingly. Humans bring capabilities we had forgotten existed, and we must learn from them if we want to be prepared for any possible threat. As the formal examination concluded, and aliens began filing out of the chamber, Riley remained behind, looking out at the stars through the massive windows. She had proven that human methods could succeed in a galaxy that had forgotten how to fight wars the way her species understood them. But she had also learned something equally important. There was wisdom in the alien approach to warfare. Their methods had brought peace and stability to most of the galaxy. Their emphasis on minimal casualties and efficient solutions had reduced the suffering that conflict traditionally caused. Perhaps the real lesson was not that one approach was superior to another, but that the galaxy was large enough to need both kinds of warriors, civilized beings to maintain peace through careful diplomacy and limited conflicts, and humans to serve as guardians against threats that could not be reasoned with or fought using conventional methods. Riley smiled as she watched the stars, knowing that she had found her place in a galaxy that was just beginning to understand what humans could offer to the ancient art of warfare.